stay connected with the world through WION. Like the page on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter for new alerts. Instagram for video.
We'll be coming to you from London for the live broadcast bulletin.
The top stories for today. Europe's largest economy, Germany, enters into recession as growth contracts by 0.3%. Latest report reveals Brexit has been responsible for a third of food price inflation in the United Kingdom since 2019. And the Boris Johnson Partygate row gets more intense. Tune in at these times only on WION World is One.
Welcome to WION World is One, broadcasting live from London this hour. You're with me, Katie Pilbeam. Let's get to the headlines. The head of Russia's Wagner mercenary group says his troops have started transferring their positions in the flashpoint eastern Ukraine town of Bakhmut to the Russian military. China accuses United States and its allies of waging a disinformation campaign after Washington, its Western partners and Microsoft said state-sponsored Chinese hackers had infiltrated critical US infrastructure networks. It's official now. Germany has entered recession. Europe's largest economy contracts for a second successive quarter. Will this have a ripple effect on the global economy? Official COVID inquiry threatens UK government with legal action if it does not release former PM Boris Johnson's unredacted WhatsApp messages and diary entries. More than 100 firefighters are battling towering flames and thick smoke from a 7-story blaze in central Sydney. Authorities say the buildings are starting to collapse while the inferno is beginning to spread to several neighbouring buildings. Real Madrid beat Rayo Vallecano 2-1 in La Liga as fans and players show their support for Vinicius Jr., who was the target of racial abuse over the weekend.
A game in which Vinicius Jr. was subjected to racist abuse, an incident which has made...
To our top story today, and Germany, Europe's biggest economy, has entered recession. This after its economy shrunk by 0.3% in the first 3 months of 2023. The German Statistics Office said that the German economy declined by 0.3% after the government accounted for inflationary effects. In the last quarter of 2022, the German economy fell by 0.5%. The country has said to have entered the recession, and that's after 2 successive quarters of contraction in the economy, and that's why it's now official. Now, Germany entering recession will shock market analysts who believe that the country will narrowly miss it in the first quarter of 2023. That's what they had predicted, and that was the forecast. Now, the German economy, which is the backbone of the European Union, is already reeling under high inflation, which led to consumption declining by 1.2% compared to last quarter. Well, for more, earlier we were joined by James Jackson from Berlin, who is a journalist and political analyst.
So I think in regards to inflation, that's the bigger issue here for most major economies. Germany's entered into a recession, and there is low growth in other economies such as the UK. But I think some economies such as France are actually doing quite well, better than expected. And I don't think there is much risk of it catching, of the sort of fire catching and a chain reaction effect happening. But what they could do is, of course, try to boost spending, try to boost shopping and household spending, because that's what's driven the German reaction here, the technical recession. So any kind of measures which could boost spending would be good, because of course, with inflation, people are already spending a lot without getting as much as they used to, and so they might not want to buy what they see as luxury items, such as cars, as I've said. So anything which can boost that spending, because actually household savings are not looking too bad in Europe from what I've seen.
Brexit has been responsible for a third of food price inflation in the UK since 2019, according to Bloomberg, based on a research paper by the London School of Economics, or the LSE, casting doubt on the government's attempts to prove that the EU departure has helped Britain. Well, the SSE's their economists, they estimated that between December 2019 and March 2023, regulatory, sanitary and other border inspections added over £7 billion or $8.7 billion to total domestic grocery prices, or £250 per family. Now, according to them, prices increased by 25% over the period, instead of the 17% they would have increased by had Britain remained a part of the EU single market. Now, the results, they surface as indicators suggest that high inflation is the new norm now, and the cost of living crisis is more of a domestic issue. Now, inflation is easing off from the multi-decade highs globally, but it does remain stubbornly elevated in the UK. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is under more scrutiny after polling firm YouGov found that almost 2/3 of Britons believe that the government is managing the EU withdrawal badly. Now, if Sunak was hoping that inflation would drop quickly this year and guarantee him an easy win in the 2024 election, he got a nasty awakening on Wednesday. Data showed that inflation figures have exceeded expectations for 3 months in a row. Inflation is becoming more persistent and penetrating previously unaffected areas such as grocery and mobile phone bills. While in Japan last week, Sunak told reporters that his Conservative government has already delivered benefits. He said the benefits included lowering the sales tax on feminine hygiene products, reworking alcohol duties to make beer cheaper in bars, and streamlining financial services regulations. However, that is not convincing everybody. Britain's new trading arrangements following Brexit formally began in January 2021. Now, the LSE research showed price rises have been noted in food categories with a heavy reliance on imports from the EU. So we're talking about beef and cheese, for instance. Well, for more on this topic, let's join our London correspondent, Alex Isaac, who has been following this. Now, we know there's been many reports, actually, some of which from Bloomberg, that Brexit is costing the UK economy some $100 billion a year, for example. We're hearing that Brexit is generally making life more expensive. Before, we were just talking about the fact that inflation was to blame. So it's a bit of a difficult one for Sunak. We know he's a Brexiteer himself. The government, they model themselves on leaving the EU. So do you think that this data will make an ounce of difference to the government's strategy on Brexit?
Well, it's quite interesting that the LSE data has come out to show that the cost is because of those tariffs, that all of the paperwork that has to go through for all of those imports and exports as well. And this was something that actually was set out before Brexit happened. There was a huge suggestion that it would be a 22% increase across the board on all imports coming into the country if Brexit went ahead. But of course, that did happen. And so it isn't quite the surprise that this has come out now. But of course, Brexit has been pushed as something that has been elongated because of the the Northern Ireland Protocol, because of the trade deals that have been trying to happen, and we're not quite yet at the end. Obviously, Rishi Sunak has to stand behind his own party, which were the ones behind the Brexit forthcoming, and he has been saying the small things that have made a big difference, but for people on the streets it won't make much of a difference that their feminine hygiene products are slightly lower than they may have been this time last year, but they won't have been as low as they were before Brexit. And of course, Labour, the opposition, have been saying that when they get into power, if they get into power, that they want to bring back some of those EU rules that were taken out by the Conservative parties, and that includes some of the human rights rules that have been removed. But of course, they will have to go through it in the next year. Everyone will have to go through this before we get to the general election, because prices are not coming down, and Brexit is one of the major issues that was foreseen. The fact that there aren't out there pickers for fruit and vegetables, the fact that a lot of the imports coming into the country are on fruit and vegetables. In fact, there was talk about lowering tariffs so it could be cheaper for those outside of the country and trade deals to come in. But then if that was going to be cheaper on tariffs, it would mean that our exporting of cheese and meat, that would also be a real problem for the British farmers, who have to also import other deals as well. So they're not really getting a huge benefit. And it looks likely that even though inflation may be coming down slowly, prices aren't likely to be coming down in the near future, and probably not even at the end of the year.
Oh, that's a depressing thought. Thank you so much, Alex Isaac. And of course, this is coming out on the same day that we know that Germany has entered recession, and also that net migration to the UK is at a record level of 606,000 in 2022. So many elements to this story. Alex Isaac, our London correspondent, thank you. The row revolving around former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, it is deepening as the inquiry panel investigating the COVID gatherings in Number 10 demands that Johnson's WhatsApp messages and diary entries are revealed. Now, the chair of the panel has also threatened to launch legal action against the UK government if they fail to release Johnson's WhatsApp messages and diaries. Now, the panel chair, Heather Hallett, extended a deadline for the material, and she expects the government will hand over the material by next Tuesday. Meanwhile, the UK government has been reluctant to provide the messages and entries. The Cabinet Office, they argue that some material is unambiguously irrelevant. On the other hand, Downing Street insisted that the UK government is providing all the relevant material. Now, Johnson described the allegations as bizarre and unacceptable. Later on, he announced that he has sacked the government-funded lawyers who were assisting him with the inquiry. Now, supporters and allies of the former Prime Minister say they have lost confidence in the Cabinet Office. This is after the Cabinet officials referred Johnson to the police over further potential breaches of COVID rules during the pandemic. Well, Johnson, he was ousted from Number 10 after a rebellion within his own party after months of allegations and claims of lockdown breaches. However, Johnson has repeatedly denied that he or his staff had breached the COVID rules in office. Now, authorities, they issued fines to dozens of aides after a probe. The ex-leader is currently being investigated as well by a parliamentary committee over whether he lied to the Parliament about the Partygate scandal. Well, Johnson loyalists also believe that he is the victim of a political witch hunt, which is aimed at preventing him returning to Number 10 potentially in the future. But even after several political scandals and allegations, Johnson still remains one of the most recognisable figures in British politics, and some senior Conservatives still claim that Johnson is their best hope of retaining power. Well, for more on this, Nicholas Nugent is joining us now, the senior journalist and former BBC editor. Thank you so much for your time. So what's your view on this? Is it a witch hunt or just comeuppance? What do you think?
It all sounds rather complicated, doesn't it? A little bit difficult to judge, but I think this is, I actually think this is all about power. And two things are going on. One is that the Conservative Party is tearing itself apart with some quite vocal criticism of the government coming from within the party, within Conservative members of Parliament. So that's going on the one hand. But on the other hand, there's the relationship between our political leaders and the civil service. We've seen how 2 cabinet ministers have lost their jobs because of accusations from within the civil service that they were bullies. Gavin Williamson and most recently the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab. In a way, what we're getting now is a third thing, because there are 2 things going on to do with the COVID. On the one hand, the Cabinet Office has referred the diaries of Boris Johnson at his country residence, the Prime Minister's country residence of Chequers, to the police. Now, that's quite amazing in its own right that the Cabinet Office have decided to report a previous Prime Minister to the police, or at least refer the documentation for them to make a judgment on whether this is an extension of what we've come to know as Partygate. In other words, the illegal holding of parties during the COVID restrictions. And I'm not saying it was that, I'm just saying there is an allegation that it might have been, and the police are being given the chance to assess that. Then on the other hand, the lady peeress, Baroness Hallett, who has a job to inquire into the whole circumstances of COVID and the lockdowns and everything, she is also demanding more information from Boris Johnson's allegedly private documentation than he is willing to provide. So the reason I say this is about power is we're seeing the power of, on the one hand, the civil service, on the other hand, the judiciary. After all, Baroness Hallett is a former judge, a former High Court judge, and thirdly, also the media for exposing these things. So we have quite an interesting little imbroglio going on about the extent to which the government of the nation are in charge. They're being challenged from the civil service. They're being challenged to some extent from the judiciary. And also the media are playing a role in drawing attention to things that have been going on. For example, the Suella Braverman speeding offence, that came out in the Sunday Times. It was the media that drew attention to it. She's apparently being let off. She's not going to be examined about that. But there's a lot of interplay, as I say, going on between the various organs of state. I don't know if that's normal, but we're coming towards the end of the parliamentary period. We expect to have elections by the end of next year. And there's a lot of power politics going on, which is quite difficult to follow day by day, as you're saying. But another aspect of this, if I can continue for a little bit longer, is Boris Johnson's clear desire to return to power in some shape or form. And yet he has hanging over him the parliamentary committee that is about to rule, well, I'm not sure when, but will rule on whether he broke the ministerial code over these COVID restrictions, or by lying to Parliament. That's the technical offence that they're looking at. So, oh goodness, okay, it's quite difficult to predict where all this is going.
Indeed it is. That's all we've got time for. But thank you so much indeed for covering lots of elements to that about the power politics and interplay going on. Never a dull moment in British politics. Thank you so much. That's Nicholas Nugent there, senior journalist and former BBC editor. Thank you for your time. Russia's private militia group has started to withdraw its troops from Bakhmut. The head of the group, Prigozhin, has said that after he claimed that his forces had captured the Ukrainian town, he has also warned that the war's current state of affairs can lead to a Russian revolution. Well, the chief of the Wagner mercenary group said that the positions captured will be transferred to the Russian army. Prigozhin was seen interacting with the troops in Bakhmut. He said that his forces will rebase its camps in the rear side of the town. Now, on Wednesday, Prigozhin had warned that Russia was in danger of a turmoil. The warning came as Prigozhin claimed that the Russian elites were not actively participating in the war, and it was the common Russians who continued to lose their lives. Well, Prigozhin said that he has lost 20,000 fighters in the drawn-out battle for Bakhmut. The Wagner chief added that this could divide Russia and cause a revolution similar to the one seen in 1917, which led to the ousting of the ruling government.
Я думаю, что украинцы сегодня это одна из сильнейших армий. У них высокий уровень организации, высокий уровень подготовки, высокий уровень разведки. У них есть различное вооружение, и более того, они работают на любых системах, на советских, на натовских, на чем угодно, одинаково успешно. И они абсолютно философски относятся к тому, какие потери они несут. У них все идет ради достижения верховной цели, как у нас в Великую Отечественную войну, но более технологично и более четко.
Meanwhile, Russia says that it has fended off an attack on its warship in Turkish waters. Russian Defense Ministry made the claim, blaming it on Ukraine. It said that the Russian vessel had been tasked with guarding pipeline infrastructure in Turkish waters. On the other side, the US approved sale of the air defense system and other related equipment to Ukraine worth $285 billion on Wednesday. Its defense agency said that the sale of the system, called the NASAMS, will help support its national security goals under its foreign policy. Well, the agency also said that the sale will not require any additional government employees to be assigned to Ukraine. Norway and the Netherlands said that they would train Ukrainian pilots on the use of this F-16 fighter jets. The announcements by the two countries came after US President Joe Biden endorsed training programs for Ukrainian pilots on F-16 fighter jets. Well, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky reacted to the announcement, saying the supply of F-16 jets would signal the end game for Russia. Ukraine has been rallying for support from multiple nations. This includes those which have taken a neutral stance on the war, while Russia has intensified its offensive on Ukraine.
До 100 людей на сході держави.
Well, the world is mourning the sad announcement of Tina Turner's death, the queen of rock and roll. She passed away at the age of 83 in Switzerland, while many took to their social media to pay tribute. Fans in London paid a tribute to her during an ongoing musical honouring the late singer. Well, the audience at the London musical honoured Tina Turner while the show was underway. For many, the news of Turner's passing reached them when they turned on their phones during the intermission in the middle of the show, barely 1 hour after she died.
It was just so emotional, just because the crew, the cast had to then give a performance and say this has happened and broke the news to us, and we were just overwhelmed. I think everybody was just so emotional. We didn't know how to react.
She was everything for me. What an amazing story. What an amazing story of resilience, of female empowerment with a happy ending, right? She seemed so at peace during the last years of her life, and the music, growing up with that music, was a gift, just a gift.
Well, as you heard then, members of the audience described how moved to tears and by the news, as you heard just there.
Obviously, earlier on in the evening, heard the dreadful news that Tina Turner had sadly passed away. And I brought probably the best bouquet of flowers you can buy, because she simply was the best. You know, growing up from many, many years ago, her songs were inspiration to me. They really were inspirational. And yes, so I've always loved Tina Turner.
Well, Turner, often called the Queen of Rock and Roll, was one of the biggest recording artists of all time, known for hits such as What's Love Got to Do With It and Simply the Best. Very sad. She was an icon. Thank you so much for your time today. Broadcasting live from London with me, Katie Pilbeam, on WION World is One. Stay tuned. More global headlines coming up shortly.
Gravitas tells you stories which others won't. And tonight we will tell you about this new strategic map that is being drawn.
They say your enemy's enemy is your friend. Is that the foundation of the new defense bridge between India and America?
This is what separates us from others who claim to be telling you global stories that matter. In the last 3 days, WION has been traveling across Syria. You are in Latakia city right now. Tell us, what is the situation on ground? At Gravitas, we don't just tell you stories from selected countries from around the world.
2 years since the Myanmar military coup, the people of Myanmar continue to live in a nightmare.
Because it does not suit their propaganda, or because they are too scared to speak truth to power.
The stress of our world can take a toll on our physical and emotional health. Here, in New York's Catskill Mountains, lies a luxurious place of healing called WION Wellness Center. The WION Wellness Center provides 500,000 square feet of natural methods to manage diabetes, hypertension, chronic pain, obesity, depression,